thank you for that very kind introduction, Mr. Lumsden, and thank you to all the friends and supporters who are joining us here today in Edinburgh. I'd also like to take the opportunity to thank especially Lord Offord, who's with us today, and indeed Andrew Bowie, who is not able to be here because of all the work that Douglas, Malcolm and Andrew have done and are continuing to do about the energy crisis we face and how we best achieve net zero. Now, obviously, I'm here to talk about energy and net zero, but I must begin by addressing the Supreme Court ruling, which confirms that biological sex is protected in law and that women are women. So let me send this message to John Swinney and the SNP. Enough is enough. Drop your divisive policy of gender self-ID for good. Far too much time and taxpayers' money has already been wasted on this fringe issue at the expense of what really matters to people out there in the real world. John Swinney and Nicola Sturgeon's focus on gender has driven a disconnect between mainstream Scotland and the Scottish Parliament. The SNP have spent years obsessing about they-them instead of building a better Scotland for everyone. So John Swinney must use his summit next week to formally end the divisive policy of gender self-ID. He must send a clear message that he and his government fully respect the law and women's rights. He must confirm that the Gender Recognition Reform Bill will not return in any form. And he must also instruct all of Scotland's public bodies to adhere to this landmark ruling. To begin to restore trust in politics, John Swinney must be big enough to admit his mistakes and apologise for the bitter divisions that this has created. If he really wants to bring people together, he should start with the women and girls who have lost faith in Scotland's political establishment. Only by dropping the policy of gender self-ID can he begin to bring people together. I now turn to the substance of what today's speech is about. And I believe the gender fiasco is an example of how priorities inside the Scottish Parliament no longer reflect the priorities of people, ordinary people outside of it. Holyrood has become a parliament for politicians, not for those who they are supposed to represent. And instead of listening to what people want, too many Holyrood politicians wag their fingers and tell people what they think they need. And to these left-wing MSPs, the views and priorities of real people are an afterthought at best. And this is especially evident in their approach to climate change and net zero. Now, of course, climate change is real to any SNP MSP, or indeed to anyone else. Please don't try to misconstrue what I say here today. Protecting our environment and tackling climate change is one of the greatest challenges of our age. But the SNP's approach is ill-conceived, it's inconsistent, it's chaotic, and it's fundamentally dishonest. John Swinney's government says it wants to achieve net zero in just 20 years' time. They seriously expect people to believe that our country will be carbon neutral by 2045. The truth is that net zero is just another empty slogan for the SNP, a political party that governs by press release, all headline-grabbing announcements, but absolutely no clue about delivery. Now, this time last year, the SNP scrapped their interim target for a 75% drop in emissions by 2030. Now, this was always pie in the sky, but they only came clean after a damning reality check from the independent statutory UK body that advises governments on emission targets. The Climate Change Committee's report confirmed that the SNP had absolutely no chance of meeting that target. This forced the SNP to drop the 2030 interim pledge. But still, they continue to spin. They say they only dropped the interim target to focus on net zero emissions by 2045. Yet since the committee's report, we've heard absolutely nothing about how they intend to do this. The SNP are also failing to be straight with the public about what this will mean for them. They tell people that this will require simple measures such as walking more or recycling domestic rubbish. If you feel charitable, this is patronising nonsense. I would call it lies. To meet the SNP's 2045 target, people and businesses would need to make radical changes that would cause huge harm to their lifestyles. And this would come at an eye-watering financial cost, from ripping out gas boilers and installing heat pumps to upgrading older homes and buying expensive electric vehicles. These are the changes the SNP wants to force on households within the next 20 years. Ordinary Scots should not be told what to do by politicians and then told they're picking up the tab. Taxpayers are already being rinsed. Businesses in this country pay more for energy than any other country in the G20. This is crippling our manufacturing sector. Yet some politicians also demand that we further impede our economy by shutting down our oil and gas sector. The SNP in Edinburgh and Labour in London would throw 100,000 skilled North Sea workers onto the scrap heap. Now, a few weeks ago, Kemi Badenoch came clean about the realities of the UK government's net zero target of 2050. She was refreshingly honest about the sacrifices this will require. She told it straight. Decarbonisation risks making families and our country poorer and less secure. So we need to do the same in Scotland. Politicians must start telling the truth. And it's now crystal clear that the SNP's 2045 target is also pie in the sky. They didn't set out any credible or affordable plan to reach it, a date plucked out of thin air by a posturing government for the purpose of headline grabbing and virtue signalling. They wanted to be seen as greener than Westminster, so they deducted 5 years from the 2050 UK target. But they've already failed to meet by a country mile the interim target they set themselves. And in a few weeks' time, the Climate Change Committee will publish a new report on the SNP's net zero strategy. And I would place a bet with John Swinney, or indeed anyone else in this room, that this report will be yet another reality check. Today, I would therefore like to lay down another challenge to the First Minister. Reaching net zero by 2045 will not be affordable for the public. So today I'm calling for the SNP's so-called just transition to be scrapped in favour of an affordable transition. And if that means ditching the 2045 target, then so be it. Now, my party will publish plans on how we would reduce bills for consumers. The priority has to be bringing down costs for the public, not setting arbitrary targets for nationalist ministers to virtue signal about. And I urge the SNP to ditch their empty sloganeering and embrace a considered and pragmatic environmentalism, a new approach that understands the need to protect our economy and to protect jobs, that takes the common sense approach of using oil and gas in the North Sea before importing fossil fuels from abroad. A Scottish Conservative transition is an honest an affordable and a pragmatic transition. It keeps household bills low and gives business a level playing field in a brutally competitive world. Energy is vital to our economy because it powers industry and drives growth. But the production of energy should also continue to be one of our greatest industries. While the demand for oil and gas remains high, we should produce it domestically. North Sea oil and gas is greener than foreign imports. It's worth billions of pounds to our economy. To sacrifice this would be madness of the highest order, while other countries continue to drill and increase their emissions. Why on earth should Scottish jobs be sacrificed for net zero? We would do so just to pretend that if we don't produce oil and gas while still needing to use it, then our hands will somehow be clean. Scotland is blessed in its sources of renewable energy, wind, tidal and solar. But the SNP want to shut down oil and gas while also refusing to embrace clean nuclear energy. But when the sun doesn't shine and the wind doesn't blow, what will power our homes, transport and businesses? Just yesterday, less than 1/3 of the amount of energy generated in the UK came from renewables, and that's not an unusual occurrence. Now, some politicians claim that advances in battery storage will magically solve the problem of how intermittent renewables are. But even if we increase battery storage capacity 8-fold, as Ed Miliband is proposing, reports suggest this will still fall far short of being able to deliver consistent power. It is blindingly obvious that Scotland also needs nuclear. Yet our nation faces losing out on abundant, clean nuclear energy and jobs because of the SNP's boneheaded ideological opposition. Now, nuclear power generated 31% of our electricity in 2021. But when Hunterston B and Ayrshire closed, that dropped to 19% 2 years later. And this leaves us even more reliant on fossil fuels for a steady baseline supply. Now, Torness in East Lothian is Scotland's last nuclear power station, and it's set to close perhaps as soon as 2030. I had a privilege of paying a visit there quite recently with Craig Hoy, my colleague, and they even allowed me to stand on top of the nuclear reactor. It's the strange things you get to do in this job. Craig tells me he stood on top of it several times, and as you can see, it's done him living proof of the safety of nuclear right there. And the operational footprint at Torness covers an area of just 0.1 square miles, 0.1 square miles. Yet this can power more than 2 million homes. By blocking new nuclear power stations in Scotland, the SNP are harming our economy and impeding efforts to reach net zero. And that's why my party would commit to starting construction on small modular reactors in the next 5 years. We would overturn the SNP government's refusal to grant planning permission for new nuclear power plants. As long as the local community gives its consent, there's no reason for nuclear energy to be blocked. And this would be the first step towards undoing years of SNP damage to our nuclear energy capacity. We would aim to build enough SMRs to replace the amount of power lost by the closures of Hunterston B and Torness. That means approximately 9 would be needed. And this will guarantee clean and stable energy. It will bring down bills for householders. It will give businesses a boost. It is basic common sense. Now, we know the SNP are anti-nuclear. They seem to muddle up nuclear energy with nuclear weapons sometimes. But they're also failing when it comes to renewables. They promised 130,000 green jobs by 2020. How many do you think they've delivered? It's around 20,000. And right now, new jobs in renewables are actually falling. Now, if new technology benefits Scotland by growing our economy and generating green jobs, we must support it. Having an honest conversation about the affordability of net zero and delivery timelines does not mean deterring investment in green industries. But the push for green energy cannot come at any financial price, nor can it come at any price to Scotland's natural beauty. Now, our great nation is blessed with some of the most stunning scenery in the world. The curtains are closed so you can't see the retail park. I'm not talking about here. And the instinct to safeguard our landscape is fundamentally conservative. Yet some politicians at Holyrood take a different view. They back vast new pylons to connect renewable energy sources to the national grid, regardless of the harm they cause. There are also plans for vast banks of batteries to be installed across the country, and many residents are understandably concerned about the impact on their communities, including the very real fear of fire. Rural communities across Scotland are enraged, but they're also worried at the mass industrialisation of our countryside. Labour at Westminster is trying to change the planning rules to make it easier to ride roughshod over these local concerns. And that's why our new pragmatic proposal is for overhead pylons to be used as a last resort, where no other options are available. And we would give communities the legal right to object to devolved planning decisions. We need to put the priorities of the people of Scotland first when it comes to the bills they pay for power and the impact of net zero on communities. Now, I think most folk out there get this, They're happy to do their bit to tackle climate change, but it must be fair and it must be affordable. We must also recognise the realities of our geography and our demographics. It's absolutely absurd to expect rural, remote, off-grid homes to replace oil-powered heating in a few years' time. Nor should car drivers in rural areas with little or no public transport be punished. And it's preposterous to ban lifeline wood-burning stoves in vast rural areas of Scotland. There are other aspects of the SNP's net zero chaos that need to be called out today. They're sending around £27 million of taxpayers' money to fund green initiatives overseas. Now, some of the money from the Climate Justice Fund, you'll be glad to know, subsidises research in Sweden. More than £200,000 has been spent training what are called climate youth negotiators for some kind of United Nations talking shop. And furthermore, the so-called Climate Justice Fund has also financed what is called gender equality, disability and social inclusion. How on earth will any of this solve our environmental problems? With climate change and net zero, the SNP's priorities are all wrong. Their so-called just transition is a fiction. They tell Scots what they must do, then tell them that they have to pay for it. They make up random targets with no plan to meet them. They seek to shut down Scotland's oil and gas sector and refuse to embrace nuclear energy. They back monster pylons regardless of how they scar Scotland. And they throw public money at daft schemes that don't reduce a single bill. Now, since becoming Scottish Conservative leader just over 6 months ago, I have repeatedly called for politicians at Holyrood to show a little bit of common sense. We know that today's challenges are complex and the answers are not easy. But the SNP think they can dupe the Scottish public with sophistry and slogans. People in Scotland are sick and tired of politicians and Parliament for precisely that reason. And if my party wants to win back trust, we need to be different. We need to present credible plans based on real Conservative values. and we need to start that by being candid about the challenges facing our country. Conservatism is the politics of reality and common sense, not wishful thinking. And as Scottish Conservatives, we have a duty to be honest. The just transition proposed by the SNP and Labour is anything but. Now, I recognise the need to tackle climate change. I said that at the beginning. But the people of Scotland should not be expected to pay a heavy and damaging price for net zero. So today, I'm challenging John Swinney to face up to reality and start being honest with the public, to set out a credible and affordable transition towards net zero, a transition that puts the people of Scotland first. Thank you very much. Thank you.